The figure of the tortured artist has occupied music and the wider artistic landscape for years. As a society, we're fascinated by it. Over the past few decades, with a spotlight firmly fixed upon it, the concept has come under criticism for reducing artists to their woes, for glorifying misery, and for reinforcing the idea that suffering leads to greater art. But what if it does? Hello, my name is not Alan Freaky, and today we're going to be talking about existentialism, authenticity, and pain in music. Okay, first things first. Nowadays, people tend to say that the idea of the tortured artist and that pain makes better music is taken as a fact, but it's not. The tortured artist trope is one of those things where everyone who talks about it says it's taken as a fact just so they can argue against it. From what I've seen, most people who actually talk about this don't agree with it.
The danger of the tortured artist
was a deeply unhealthy way of thinking.
I hate the tortured artist trope with a fiery passion.
Second thing second, a little disclaimer. This video isn't meant to glorify or trivialise pain. I'm really just seeing how far we can follow a theory. For anyone who is struggling, some numbers or links are in the description and potentially on the screen, editor pending, and I'd encourage you to use them. That's what they're there for. Okay, let's go.
I can't let these people play me. Name one genius that ain't crazy.
Let's go all the way back. Let's get philosophical. The idea that suffering brings an additional level of depth and intelligence or vice versa has always existed, especially in Western societies. We can trace the belief that genius and madness go hand in hand back to the greatest thinkers of the times of our ancestors, Plato and Aristotle. These geezers saw that something separated art from your everyday, run-of-the-mill, me and you types, and they wanted to understand why. In his 380 BC cult classic Ion, Plato explored the idea that artists are possessed by a heavenly force, becoming vessels of the gods who create through them. His argument was that true artistry doesn't come primarily from intrinsic skill, but from some sort of divine madness. The madness is attached to the person even when they're not arting. It floods the rest of their life in erratic behaviour and hopes of escapism. This line of thought tied art and madness together and suggested that true art needed madness. Aristotle would focus more on sadness than madness. In his bestseller Problemata XXX, he claimed that all exceptional men are melancholic and observed a natural link between creativity and despondence. For Aristotle, this creativity didn't necessarily come from the gods, but it still brought with it an extra burden specific to the creative mind, a burden of seeing things in a different way, of seeing more than others, and a burden of responsibility that blossoms from that. The ideas of Plato and Aristotle became pillars for Western thoughts on creativity. The idea that suffering is a prerequisite for true artistic greatness would continue through the years and begin to evolve in the medieval and then Renaissance periods. Medieval period follows collapse of the Roman Empire, huge for Catholicism. In these times, suffering was depicted as less of a personal affliction and as more of a religious experience. In line with Plato's thinking, art came from the same celestial space. The individual was merely God's paintbrush rather than an artist in their own right with their own struggles. But there was one place where the divine world and personal torment would collide and the individual suffering soul would be heralded. Jesus was the original tortured artist. That's so fucking Jesus. Following the lead of Jesse himself, the medieval world began to see individual suffering as a path towards holiness. Pain was a divine experience. Those who visibly suffered and expressed their suffering were connected to God. This is where Plato's divine madness and Aristotle's melancholic artist would overlap, and where the concept of the tortured artist would begin to evolve. And this brings us to Romanticism. Late 18th to mid 19th century, Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution had taken Europe and the US in a too practical, rational direction. Romanticism was a rebellion against this. It was an artistic movement that emphasised individualism and emotion over reason. The heroes of the day were lonely, misunderstood figures who encapsulated Aristotle's depressed creative. Apologies Plato, the links to religion largely gave way to links to the deep personal torment. It was another step past middleman Jesus in the direction of individualism. The artists themselves started becoming something of wider communal interest, an early form of parasocial fascination. You had poets like Lord Byron, a rock star of the time, a scandalous, tortured, brooding genius. He lived in exile trying to escape a society that didn't truly understand him and died after seeking a glorious death. The Shelleys, author Mary and poet husband Percy Bysshe largely followed the same pattern: exile, scandal, tragedy and an early death. John Keats popularised the idea that beauty must die, something later musicians would be obsessed with. He died of tuberculosis at 25, believing himself a simple outsider who hadn't achieved anything. Sound familiar? Only in hindsight did his suffering and early death become central to how his work was understood, to the point where he's now a household name. As far as poets go, at least. Specifically in music, you had people like Beethoven, a musician who started losing his hearing at an early age, in the end composing while completely deaf. He became a gruff, isolated figure who failed to find the love he so desperately sought. His struggles pushed him musically. These people were the personifications of Aristotle's thoughts on sadness and pain being necessary for true art. There was a further evolution of the concept through the short lives of people like Shelley and Keats. Their deaths would popularise the idea that true beauty must be fleeting. Endings are important in a nostalgic and tragic sense. We can see these ideas continue in our obsession with the 27 Club. This brings us to existentialism.
No way later, still I fuck my 28th.
A philosophical movement that shaped the latest big evolution of the perception of the tortured artist. Existentialism became a dominant force in the 20th century, following the works of big dogs like Kierkegaard, Nietzsche and Sartre. Generally, existentialism argues that we create meaning in our own lives, which is terrifying, obviously, but also freeing until the need for purpose is rammed down our throats. It was partially a response to nihilism, the idea that life has no inherent meaning, and yet we all keep searching for it anyway. Mix this worldview with suffering and alienation, and you get the blueprint of a modern tortured artist. Doubt, self-destruction, pain, and a search for identity. There are countless figures who played into this in the modern and postmodern era. Existentialist views became intrinsic to their works, which fused pain and identity, and this often manifested into dark, brilliant, sometimes haunted pieces of work. From this point, the evolved ideas wormed themselves into the contemporary era, the lyrics of Joy Division's Ian Curtis, Nirvana's Kurt Cobain, among many others. Instead of the philosophy describing already formed suffering artists started building themselves around this blueprint that had been curated throughout the years, becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is all to say that way before the contemporary era, the idea that pain and suffering add depth to art was already baked into Western culture, and history is full of examples that support this. But things can change. I have a goatee now. You're just about to subscribe to the channel. So what are the reasons why these ideas have continued to permeate culture? Let's put our contemporary hats on, dive deeper, and ask ourselves, what exactly is it about the tortured artist that continues to speak to us? My tears dry on their own. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. My first point, perhaps my main point, is emotional connection. Music made around pain or made by people who've known it fosters deeper emotional connections. And there's a little bit of science to back this up. Just a tiny weeny bit. In a study from Matthew Sachs, Antonio Damasio and Asal Habibi, the trio argue that music that conveys sadness draws us in for three reasons. Numero uno, when sadness is an art, we can relate to it in a way that is removed from the social and physical baggage in which we normally experience it. In a sense, we can allow ourselves to wallow in this emotion without having experienced anything bad in that moment. We can process and forge a relationship with this sadness without feeling that we're at risk, giving us proper time to reflect. It's a strange, almost a privileged feeling that shows us as separate from our basic emotional state, and there's a willingness to deep this existentially, even if the pain is second-hand.
Nothing's really happened like I thought it would.
Rather than showing sadness or pain as something that is good, this suggests that pain can be informative and sadness can be unpacked. And the second thing these academics say drives this point further.
We are driving in a car.
Point 2. Music about sorrow is beautiful because it deals with eudaimonic concerns. I don't really know what that means, but from what I can tell, this is saying that sad music sort of ironically delves into the topics that really make us happy. While a lack of social connection and a failure to find existential meaning can make us sad, finding them can make us happy, and sad music interrogates these ideas. It's sort of the idea that happiness and sadness are two sides of the same coin, and to achieve either we play with the same building blocks, but happy music often takes these blocks for granted and dives no deeper, and so doesn't convey the same depth of information. I have an example, and you might think it's a terrible example, but I will die on the hill that this is a great example. I'm going to talk about two prominent figures in the SoundCloud rap scene of the teenies. In late August 2017, Gazzy Garcia, aka Lil Pump, released his magnum opus, Gucci Gang.
Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang.
It's a pretty simple song about being happy with excessive wealth, it's feel-good-ish, and boasts these lyrics. Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang.
Gucci gang.
Gucci gang, Gucci gang, Gucci gang.
Gucci gang.
Spent 3 racks on a new chain.
Yeah.
My bitch love do cocaine.
Oh.
Shivers. Not sad music. Not much to unpack. Lil Yachty Pumpernickel certainly wasn't releasing sad music here and would very rarely be classed as a tortured artist, but let's compare him to someone who did release sad music and, from the new generation at least, sometimes is classed as such. Around 6 months later, on March 2nd, 2018, my 20th birthday no less,
there is no such thing as a coincidence.
Jose Onfroy, aka XXXTentacion, released Sad. Is the fact that the song is literally called Sad really on the nose? This song was also pretty simple, also by a SoundCloud rapper, but let's look at the chorus. Who am I? Someone that's afraid to let go. You decide if you're ever gonna let me know. Suicide if you ever try to let go. I'm sad, I know ya. I'm sad, I know ya. Like Gucci Gang, it's a pretty simple chorus. It's straightforward in the lyrics and in the beat, but it got a lot of discussion and meaning attributed to it because there were parts to unpack. For example, the clever uncertainty around I'm sad, I know ya / I'm sad, I know ya. When someone says, I'm sad, we dig deeper into the reasons why this is the case, think how we would react in the same position. Reflect on how we may have reacted when we were in the same position. When Lil Pump talks about why he's happy, cool. Nothing more to unpack. Gucci. Ultimately, a lot of happy, unpained, feel-good music does tend to present happiness in quite a one-dimensional manner, whether the song is good or bad. Now, this is pretty contentious because it's easy to argue that there are great bodies of music from artists that wouldn't be considered tortured and aren't confined to negative emotions. Similarly, you can argue that the deep hole of depression is the hardest place to make art out of, as innovative director David Lynch does. And while there is a little bit of science that indicates that people with major depression are more likely to be creative than those without, I do agree with all of the above. But the first thing I'd say is that pain is relative. So you don't have to be the most tortured artist in the world to make music that addresses pain and deals with the same eudaimonic concerns. The second thing I'd say regarding other emotions being important is that our tortured artists, people who've been through severe pain, don't just make sad music. And I think their songs can offer us more, even when they aren't necessarily sad. I'm going to quickly talk about standpoint theory. For me, standpoint theory is simply when lived experience expands your perspective. I'm sure there'll be an actual definition on screen. This is clearest with marginalised groups in society. If we take feminist standpoint theory, for example, this would argue that women recognise what it's like to be a woman because they are one, but they also have an understanding of the male lens because this is the dominant lens of the world and is pervasive in their day-to-day life, in a society where most of the decisions are made by men.
In a society where most of the decisions are made by men, one woman seems more.
Basically, men are less likely to understand a woman's point of view than a woman is to understand a man's because of a male ideology still being prevalent in their world. This doesn't necessarily mean women are wiser, but their perspectives on matters that are in any way linked to gender are potentially wider, and this can be extended to other groups. Sadness is way more subjective and relative. No one exists in a happiness-sadness binary. But I think we do live in such a happiness-obsessed culture in the West where we're constantly told that we're meant to be feeling happy, that this is a dominant societal ideology, the default position, and so this idea of standpoint still stands. Those who've experienced deep pain or live in a sad existential world also understand a happy worldview lens, so they can still make songs authentically from either POV, but will often merge the two lenses, which adds depth to their work. Guess who's got another example? Mac Miller had huge highs, deep lows. He died from an accidental overdose in 2018. After his frat rap days as a young up-and-comer, he would constantly be addressing his woes in his music, as he did on the last project released during his life, Swimming, released around 1 month before his death. I get really sad when I talk about Mac Miller, I think because I saw his evolution and was kind of there listening to his albums while he was going through it. Anyway, the album Swimming was often about him coming out of a depressed period, especially on songs like Self-Care. And there's one song that in retrospect feels like a sad song, but to me it's not. It's a nostalgic song. If we focus on the lyrics, it's kind of uplifting and empowering. And this is the penultimate song, 2009. I don't need to lie no more. Nowadays all I do is shine, take a breath and ease my mind, and she don't cry no more. It's still happiness, or at least contentment, but it's created through experiencing pain previously and acknowledging the movement away from it. When he did have to lie, when she did cry, the previous pain can still be central to it, even when the song is about moving to contentment. This is an example of not necessarily a happy song, but an uplifting song still dealing with eudaimonic themes. It shows that other emotions matter, but the lens of pain can deepen them. It also shows that you don't need to be in the deepest, darkest hole to express pain, but having gone through it can be powerful. Let's address the last point of our trio of academics now.
What'd you say? Stop! Strike!
Sad music can help individuals cope with negative emotions. There are different ways that this can happen because there are different ways that we consume music. Watch my video, What Do We Want From Music, for more on that. I'm so shameless. But I want to focus on what is, in my opinion, the main way that sad music can help us cope, and that's through normalisation. I'm very into normalisation right now, in theory at least. I'm always on my do as I say and not as I do shit. But normalisation. It can happen on an individual and on a societal level when there's something you're scared about doing or something you're scared about revealing to people. Just telling them and letting time take its course is so powerful. Things become more accepted as time passes, and it becomes just one part of who you are, and as an extension of that, a slightly louder part of what society is. This can be quite hard to reach though individually, and this is when music with pain comes into it. Music that speaks on struggle, speaks on mental health issues, is powerful for normalising these as real issues. People struggle, people get hurt, people do drugs.
Welcome to the real world.
While I get that we don't want to normalise the acts of all these things, brushing these topics under the carpet doesn't really help us as a society. It forces people to suffer in silence because they don't think it's okay to talk about these issues, much less be struggling with them. If we see Janis Joplin or Kurt Cobain talking about their struggles and struggling themselves, it can give us more slack. If these artists can struggle and still be so great, be lauded, then so can we. Normalising not all being picture perfect on our Instagram holidays can only be a good thing because it's more authentic. Ultimately, hearing about people we respect going through shit can make us feel like we're not alone in a world that can often try to push struggle to a side. Historically, tortured artists have been outcasts, and it's often the art that pushes society to accept them. This shows that while there is a sort of individual side of normalisation, there's also a sense in which those who aren't struggling are part of the normalisation once they become aware of it. They can empathise more, and these conversations can happen two ways. There's a limit to this, of course. Normalisation isn't an overnight scenario. You don't hear Waltz No. 2 by Elliott Smith and become a therapist immediately. But the art can be a step in the right direction in a longer term process. These are my main reasons why we shouldn't simply dismiss pain in music making better art. There are artistic reasons and societal reasons why conveying pain in music can push this art to a new level or deepen it. But it'd be amiss for me not to get into some more counter-arguments. So let's do that now.
There's nothing romantic in being alone.
The first counterpoint I'm going to address is reductionism. We've already covered and countered the idea that the idea of the tortured artist reduces the number of emotions that matter, so let's look at another side of it. People argue that the tortured artist label reduces the artists to their struggles. It strips away their complex being, their humanity, and equates them to their pain. I think this is surreal, but the onus for reducing artists doesn't sit with the label, it sits with us, the ones who are actually doing the reduction. On paper, labelling someone as a tortured artist isn't the same as saying they are only a tortured artist. People have a tendency to reduce one another anyway, especially with people we don't have a multifaceted relationship with. In Charles R. Cook's book, Roomful of Mirrors, a biography of Jimi Hendrix, it said that before he was even a tortured artist, him becoming a god of the electric guitar stripped away his humanity. He was already reduced from a person to a guitarist because he was such a good guitarist. And I think that's almost natural in a way, in a world where we are so connected to so many other people, even if it's indirectly. How are we possibly meant to fathom the complexity of these people we don't properly know? It's so much easier to reduce them, it's almost impossible not to. Still, this reduction is on us and how we view the label, rather than the issue being with the concept of whether pain makes better music. So let's move on to my next counter-argument. Glorification.
People are strange when you're a stranger.
Glorification of pain is a tricky one to get around. It's pretty easy to raise it to dismiss all talk of the tortured artist trope.
I hate the tortured artist trope with a fiery passion.
So let me give this my best shot. What does it mean to glorify? To value something to an excessive level that overrides judgment? Something like that? So in this case, glorifying an artist's pain over their humanity or glorifying negative actions or habits. Glorifying itself isn't the problem if it's contained. It's still weird, don't get me wrong. I really enjoy the documentary Amy, but it is a bit macabre that we obsess over this sort of content that shows the downfall of someone. It's rare for biopics that are purely celebratory or focus on the music to get as much playtime. That being said, again, it's the actions off the back of glorifying that are the imminent problem. Or perhaps the lack of prevention in real time because of the glorification, so sometimes the lack of action. For example, how Amy was clearly so far gone and needed help, but very few of the people around her tried to help her in the right way. I saw the Scottish artist Jacob Alon semi-recently. Incredible concert, but I left feeling uneasy because clearly they were going through a lot of shit, and despite this overarching line that I'm following, all I could think was, I hope somebody helps them.
Don't fall
To be crystal clear, pain is bad. It's a natural part of life. It can give people new worldviews, push them further, but it's not something to be sought. It's this act of pushing ourselves or pushing others to chase pain because we glorify it that is the issue. Similar to with reductionism, it's not the theory, it's our response. If someone has made a living off their pain-filled art, this doesn't mean they don't need intervention. We should value the human over anything that has developed out of their pain. Not only because being in the midst of pain isn't necessary, but mainly, almost entirely, because their humanity and health matter most. Super quickly, there's also a byproduct of glorification that I want to address. We sometimes let our tortured artists get away with things. For example, domestic abuse and other abhorrent activities which we wouldn't normally let people get away with. The excuse of behaviour comes from us glorifying the pain within the artist, blaming the pain, and seeing the behaviour as almost a necessary evil that has to exist for the art to exist. It's an argument riddled with holes and it harms the victims, but again, this is on our relationship with the label and our behaviour, not the concept. Now, when we talk about whether the artists are glorifying pain themselves or potentially suicide, drugs, self-harm, mental health issues by bringing them up in their content, there's such a line between expression and safety. We should be able to express freely, but we should also consider the potential consequences of what we say. And I personally think that this all comes down to authenticity.
Train spotting, I got babies on my ceiling.
Man, I wrote a whole dissertation on authenticity and appropriation several years ago, and it still spins my head. In the real world...
Welcome to the real world, Jeremy.
Yeah, you keep saying that.
In the real world, glorification and authenticity often go hand in hand. People idolise the pain, glorify pain, and then chase pain or imitate the pain. This is authentic. It's trying to obtain pain through extracurricular activities. Now, pain is so relative that I'm not about to point fingers at any individuals and say that they're liars or exaggerators, but on a grander level, we can certainly talk about inauthenticity because we do know that people do this. And if the shoe fits, you can bet your bottom dollar I'm going to shove it on your smelly little foot. The authenticity that springs from glorification of pain diminishes real pain and makes light of it, and it can also lead to dangerous positions. When an authentic artist posts as a tortured artist to their audience, not only are they pushing narratives for nothing other than their own benefit, but they're also straight up lying about things and encouraging people down a path that they themselves don't even fully know the dangers of, painting a false image of what the pain world looks like. There's still clearly real harm that can fall, even when people talk about things like this authentically. But I think this goes back to having proper, authentic conversations about it, because the world isn't perfect and bad shit will happen with or without art that echoes pain. And I also think that the vast majority of these times, those making music about their reality aren't glorifying it, they're expressing how it really was for them.
Woke up annihilated, lying on a pavement covered in items I regurgitated.
Take Trainspotting, a book and film about young adults in Scotland who are skagheads, heroin users. Danny Boyle film from the Irvine Welsh book. A reason that Trainspotting was so successful is because of how real it felt. It felt real because it was authentic. Author Irvine Welsh was a heroin user in the 20s. He could accurately depict the highs and lows. I don't think this glorifies the use. You can't seriously tell me that you watch Trainspotting and walk away from it like, ooh yeah, taking heroin would be a great life choice for me right now. I do think authentic art can still occasionally push people in a direction of pain which they may not have gone without it, which is bad. But I don't think I would reduce the freedom of authentic expression because of this. Maybe I'd feel differently if I'd be more directly affected by it. For me, the art itself can't be blamed for this alone. To prevent rampant drug use, mental health issues, etc., we need to look more broadly at our society, and having real case studies and conversations around this is a good place to begin. All in all, it's society and the actions we take off the back of glorification and reductionism that are the issue, not the concept of pain-deepening art itself.
My life I has to fight.
About to go on a tiny little side quest here, because I have one more issue with the tortured artist label, and it's one that I haven't seen anybody talk about before. And this is that while there are no real set rules for who is considered a tortured artist, there are common unspoken assumptions. And one that I've noticed is that we often only allow certain artists from certain backgrounds to be tortured artists. Usually people from the most underprivileged backgrounds don't fall within the category. This is likely because we expect the underprivileged to have more pain. It's not news and it doesn't necessarily fit with the existential definitions of the last evolution of the concept. It's an idea of internal suffering versus external suffering. Those who've been tortured by external suffering by being underprivileged don't fit the label. Those whose major battle is an internal one do. You could argue that despite his external struggle at a young age to get the label, Jimi Hendrix had to demonstrate the internal struggle to the satisfaction of a white audience and fully integrate into a majority white middle-class movement. Again, this is an issue with the projections we put onto the tortured artist label, but I think this could be changing. I want to now ponder whether we're about to experience another evolution of the tortured artist concept. Let's look to the future.
I'm the bad guy. Duh.
I'm about to go full-blown hypothetical. Let's consider how society has changed even since the times of Amy Winehouse. The streaming era has increased the sheer volume of musicians who are known by millions of people without having to be A-list. Social media has also redefined how we speak to artists and how artists speak to us. We don't need interviews from mainstay publications to access artists and have them speak directly to us, saying whatever they want really, being as honest as they want with less confinements.
Think you'll ever be a Tyler doll?
Probably not. Yeah, my fans will probably cut a hole in it and fuck it.
Streaming and social media have increased the amount of people we can have parasocial relationships with. See how I spoke about my relationship with Mac Miller earlier. I was upset when he died because I felt like I'd followed him through his life, his ups and downs, and seen how he developed. I felt like I really, truly knew his struggles. Even if I still just saw a glimpse, I saw way more than I would have even 10 years before. Now, Mac Miller is nowhere near the same level as many of those, say, in the 27 Club, so we can question whether he's even considered to be in the tortured artist group. In many ways, he fits the archetype, and it's easier to put the label on someone in hindsight, which in itself is interesting, because how many artists are there who could have been considered tortured artists if they died younger at a specific period of their life, and would we consider the classic tortured artists as tortured if they died later despite having gone through the same things? Possibly not. But back to my question on who fits the tortured artist mould. I don't think Mac Miller's someone who is universally or even almost universally agreed to be part of the category. But here's the thing. Here's the evolution. He doesn't have to be. As music continues to become more segmented and as fan bases become microcosms outside of the mainstream media, more and more people will have followers that perceive them as being tortured. This is because of a closer link and there's a deeper connection, and because everybody goes through pain, there are levels to it, of course, but innately it's relative, and the worst thing that ever happens to you is still the worst thing, and it can be expressed in really painful, tortured artist adjacent terms, regardless of privilege. If we take a look at some more recent examples, take Billie Eilish or Juice WRLD, even someone like Quadeca, they all express pain in music and have these loyal fan bases who can see them as tortured artists without the mainstream media having to recognise this. We don't all have to agree on who the tortured artists are for the people who are most important for perpetuating these ideas to recognise them as stuff. They're fans. And my theory is that as the music industry continues to segment, more and more artists will be seen as being tortured until almost all of them are within their own bubbles. And music itself and our expectations upon it become so intrinsically linked and connected to personal pain that everyone will be considered tortured, and so in a sense, no one will.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
This would be a new evolution of how the artist is viewed in regards to pain. I might be talking absolute bollocks there.
But in the end, it doesn't even matter.
So where do we land on the tortured artist and the idea that pain makes better music? There's a huge correlation between an expression or experience of pain being reflected in art and this art carrying deeper emotional weight. It's been seen throughout history. Argue with me, argue with my boys Plato and Aristotle, and there are countless examples of people fitting this mould. This surely can't be a coincidence. The reasons for this, at least in our times, are that we connect with pain in art. I've argued that people who experience pain can create from this standpoint as well as from the dominant lens of a society that pushes happiness, and that normalising these conversations about struggles is important. So while it's too much to say that pain makes better art, my stance is that it can add another layer to art. But the art doesn't necessarily have to come from the most tortured artists, and especially not from artists who are currently in the pits of a mental health crisis. The fixation on the label of the tortured artist and what we do with it is the problem. It leads to yet another reduction of these artists, and it glorifies pain, which can be dangerous for a whole host of reasons. But these problems come from how we use the label, not from the idea that pain can deepen art. So while I don't hate the concept, I do believe we'd be better off as a society if we shed the associations that we attribute to the tortured artist label. Or, shed the label entirely. But maybe, just maybe, this is already happening as music listeners become more segmented. I will be, forever, the optimist. And that's all I've got for you today. It would be pretty goddamn chill if you subscribed. It would be almost as chill if you liked. And it may just be the chillest thing you've ever done if you did both. I'm going to be dropping videos like this every month or so, and hopefully something a bit smaller between each edition. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Constructive criticism and dialogue are very much appreciated. This is a huge topic. What did I miss? What are the holes in my arguments? Poke them. Until next time, thank you for watching. Stay cool. Never stop stopping. Days and their ease don't seem like much, till they turn to the seeds that Persephone took. Start to think, wait, is this my life? I'm not okay, but I'll be alright. More my old futures, all of them. Tell myself life will still come, still I can't get a wink at night. I'm not okay, but I'll be alright. I haven't been truly happy since Mac Miller died. I'm not saying it's related, but the correlation's there. I was in the Cali Picture House in Edinburgh, watching punters with the sound off. That was not a good AM. I've been swimming in circles since then. Because he was 26 and I'm 27 now, I thought I'd be looking for a club to join. Instead, a foot to rub, a length of time. I'm pining for contentment. I used to confine it, condescend the simply satisfied. Ambition is my rider, but my life, it's like a plaything. I hold all yours as the real thing, and I never got the two confused. It was always do as I say, never as I do. Till I almost got hit by those words, but they missed by the gap in it. I saw your life flash before my eyes. It was perfect. I was absent. I say I won't give way like Elliot Smith, and I'm nearly convinced, but as scary as shit. I'm a marionette for a nefarious dick. No tears on my wrists, but my head's in bits. I'm not okay, but I'll be alright.